my name is Matthew Parrish. I work here at the beautiful Whitehall State Historic Site in Richmond, Kentucky. And I wanted to put out another video. I've been doing a couple videos here at Whitehall that talk about some of the really cool things that are here inside the Whitehall Mansion. It's getting close to Memorial Day when I am making this video, so I kind of wanted to do a Memorial Day special and talk about some really neat military history that's here at Whitehall. So happy Memorial Day to everybody. I also wanted to do just a quick update about the site itself. The site is not open at the moment, but it will be opening very soon on June 3rd. The ownership of Whitehall has moved to the city of Richmond. It's a really great change. We've got a little bit of a bigger budget now, and we've got some really great things coming here in this tour season in 2026. So come on out if you can on June 3rd. It's a Wednesday. We're going to have kind of an opening day celebration. We're going to have reenactors. We'll have some food trucks. So it's going to be a fun day. But today I'm wanting to do like I said, a Memorial Day special and talk about some neat military history here at the Whitehall State Historic Site. I've got some really interesting weapons in front of me, a pair of brass flintlock pistols and a saber here that belonged to the father of Cassius Clay. You can see right behind me, his father, Green Clay, who's kind of the originator of this site. Green Clay was a brigadier general in the Kentucky militia during the War of 1812. And we're fairly certain that these weapons that I have in front of me here are original pieces that he had with him when he was fighting during the War of 1812. So I'll get into these really neat items here in a sec, but very quickly I want to do a little bit of background about the War of 1812 because it's one of these conflicts in American history that not a lot of people know about. So the War of 1812, a lot of historians kind of have two big main reasons that the conflict originally begins. For one thing that kind of brings war between the United States and England is the impressment of sailors from American ships into the British Navy. So this is something that's going on sort of during the Napoleonic era. British ships would stop American ships and board them, and they would basically force sailors into joining the British Navy. The way that they sort of got around it is that they claimed that they were searching for British sailors who had left the Navy without permission to work in the United States and when they weren't supposed to. But in reality, they would just stop American ships and grab whoever they wanted and force them onto British ships to fight in the British Navy. So this is a big thing that Americans are getting really upset about at this time period. A lot of American politicians are really kind of arguing that we should not only close ourselves off from Great Britain, but possibly declare war on them over this as well. But another thing that's happening is that there are continuation of fighting and warfare between United States and indigenous tribes in what's at that point called the Great North, the Old Northwest. So Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan. So around this time period, 1812, there are two Shawnee leaders that really kind of start basically their own war. One of them was named Tecumseh. Some people already know about Tecumseh. He is a very famous sort of Shawnee war chief. And Tecumseh's brother, his name was Tenskwatawa. So they're an amazing duo, these two brothers. Tecumseh was sort of a war chief, tactician, but of course he's also a politician as well. His brother, Tenskwatawa, while also being involved in tribal politics, he is also more of a religious leader. So Tecumseh's War, it's what's sort of a smaller part of this War of 1812 gets started shortly before the War of 1812 begins. when Tecumseh starts fighting against U.S. soldiers. Another big part of Tecumseh's war was sort of a religious revival amongst indigenous tribes that were joining his cause. There was this idea that they should do away with European American influences, religion, even clothing, and go back to sort of this older way of lifestyle. Tecumseh's War gets officially started shortly before the War of 1812, when war is declared on England by the United States. Tecumseh very quickly allies himself with the British that are still up there in Canada in that Great Lakes region. So you've got the British, you've got Americans, you've got Canadians, and you have indigenous tribes all in a confederation that is led by Tecumseh, including tribes like the Shawnee and the Miami and the Potawatomi. So there's a lot of different stuff going on at this time period. There's fighting in the oceans, there's fighting in Canada, and of course a lot of the fighting is happening on the frontier in the American West, in, like I said, that area of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan. So that's just kind of a background about what's going on in the War of 1812. Kentucky, despite being far away from oceans and by this time sort of isolated from this frontier area, is heavily involved in the War of 1812. Kentucky politician Henry Clay, who is now in the U.S. House of Representatives, he is Speaker of the House in 1811, leading up to the War of 1812, and he is also the unofficial or unwritten leader of a group of young, kind of gung-ho politicians that get nicknamed the War Hawks. So Henry Clay and a lot of other politicians kind of like him, they are pushing for war with Great Britain and finally get Congress to pass a declaration of war. So Henry Clay, Kentuckian, basically gets the war started almost. Another reason that a lot of Kentuckians get involved is an early conflict that happens in January of 1813, just shortly after the war gets started, called the Battle of Frenchtown. The battle does not go very well. There's a lot of Kentucky soldiers, militiamen there. The soldiers, U.S. forces ended up basically surrendering to British and indigenous warriors. There was about 400 people, Americans, killed in that battle. A lot of them were Kentuckians, and around 500 were actually taken prisoner. So this battle happens. It goes very badly for the U.S. forces, and what happens after the battle is often called the River Raisin Massacre. So there was a river near there called the River Raisin. Basically what happens is all of these soldiers who were taken prisoner, a lot of them are injured, a lot of them are sick. And while British soldiers are leaving the battlefield, indigenous warriors basically attack these imprisoned U.S. soldiers. Around 40 to 60 are killed. And most of them, if not all of them, were Kentuckians, and a lot of them were wounded men as well. So even though this all kind of goes along with the frontier warfare that was happening at that time, a lot of these indigenous warriors had villages that had been attacked and destroyed by these American forces. So that's probably why this massacre happens. It just shocks the people of Kentucky. There's so many people captured, there's so many people missing, so many people killed, and actually even killed while they're in prison, which was normally kind of a thing you wouldn't do. It just creates so much anger in a lot of Kentuckians. So there's this sort of battle cry that gets used throughout the war after the River Raisin Massacre, which is "Remember the Raisin." So a lot of Kentuckians join up during the War of 1812, especially after the River Raisin Massacre. So that leads us to the story of Cassius Clay's father, Green Clay, taking command of a group of Kentucky militia. This happens kind of a couple months after the River Raisin massacre, but still early 1813. Green Clay was a brigadier general in the Kentucky militia, and he's given command of about 1,200 men. They march from Lexington up to Cincinnati and then into Ohio, way into northern Ohio to a fort called Fort Meigs. Fort Meigs is in modern day just outside of Toledo, Ohio. So really, really close to those Great Lakes, way up in northern Ohio there. So Green Clay, he brings his Kentucky militia up there. The militia is a really interesting group of people. There's older men, there's a lot of younger men involved. If you look at the statistics of men in Kentucky fighting in the War of 1812, about 5 out of 6 men who were of military age, so around 18 to 45 or 50, join up in the war. So that's the majority of the men in the state all join throughout the war. So there's a ton of different kinds of people. They're formed very quickly. The soldiers don't really have any real training at all, pretty much. They don't really get their own uniforms as far as I've been able to figure out. I think they were just wearing whatever they could get. And a lot of the soldiers are actually bringing their own weapons as well. They have at least one or two companies of riflemen, men bringing their own Kentucky long rifles into the fight, into the fray. So they march up through Ohio. They finally get to Fort Meigs. And there's a bit of a problem when they get to the fort, because Tecumseh, the Shawnee war chief that I mentioned earlier, and a British general named Proctor are actually besieging the fort. So there are forces, American forces inside the fort, but they need reinforcements. That's why these Kentuckians are getting there. But there's enemies all around the outside of the fort. So Green Clay has to figure out how to get into the fort. Another problem is that right next to the fort there is a river called the Maumee River, and there are British cannon batteries set up on the far side of that river, and they are bombarding the American Fort Meigs. So what Green Clay does is he divides his forces. He takes some of his men basically straight in to the fight, and they are trying just to get inside of Fort Meigs. But he sends a captain named William Dudley, who commands about 850 men, sends them to the other side of the Maumee River to capture those British cannon emplacements. So Green Clay is able to fight his way into the fort, so him and his men successfully get inside. However, William Dudley and his men, things do not go so well for them. And what results in their attack of these British cannons is what is often called by historians Dudley's defeat. So essentially what happens is a whole string of mistakes and bad calls and people not listening to orders. So originally what their plan was to get to the cannons and spike them. So spiking cannons was basically you would take a metal spike, I think made out of copper or iron, and you would drive that spike into the touch hole of a cannon and break it off. So now that touch hole where you would fire the cannon off is now completely filled. There's no way you can get it out unless you use a screw, and that would take a long time. So basically rendering those cannons useless. Well, William Dudley and his men, they successfully get to the cannons. They're able to chase off Shawnee or indigenous warriors and British soldiers there, so they capture those cannons. But the problem is they didn't bring their spikes. They get sent by boat to the opposite bank of the river. So that was sort of a mistake there. And so they actually don't have spikes. So these poor soldiers are having to try to use their musket ramrods, and they're putting sticks and pieces of grass in the touch holes of the cannons, just trying to render them useless, but it's not successful. Another problem is how the Kentucky militia sort of are known in the War of 1812. A lot of them, like I said, are young men. They have very little training. They've never been in combat. They've never had any experience in military life at all. However, the lifestyle of Kentucky at that time was still kind of it's still kind of a frontier state. So a lot of these young men, their fathers had fought in the American Revolution. They've grown up in the country almost on the edge of the frontier. So they're pretty kind of rough and ready sort of guys. And they're always incredibly enthusiastic about getting into the thickest part of the battle. So what happens is when these British and indigenous warriors retreat, when Dudley and his men get to these cannons, a lot of the Kentucky militia go chasing after them into the woods without being given any sort of orders. William Dudley and his other officers, they keep ordering their men to stay put and to come back. Eventually they have to chase after them into the woods. And very quickly, a lot of the men get scattered, and it leads to Dudley's defeat. Out of the about 860 men that go with William Dudley, about 530 are killed, and that includes William Dudley and a lot of his officers. They're killed in this fight. About 180 are taken prisoner, and so there only leaves about 150 men out of the 850 that are able to actually get back to Fort Meigs. So it's a complete disaster. Most of these men are killed and captured. The cannons, which were supposed to be spiked and rendered useless, are actually very quickly able to get back in running order. And so while Green Clay is in Fort Meigs, the British continue to bombard the fort from across the Maumee River. The whole story of Dudley's defeat is pretty interesting and really kind of tells you a lot about what this kind of frontier warfare was like. These Kentucky soldiers, they would often just charge into the fray. Sometimes it worked out great, sometimes it didn't. But that was sort of how frontier warfare was back during the War of 1812. So before I finish talking about Fort Meigs and Green Clay's time there, I want to talk about these items. So I've got a saber here, a really beautiful sword. This is said to have belonged to General Green Clay. It's got a really interesting eagle head pommel. It has an actual ivory handle there and some pretty neat carving or engraving on the sword. So Green Clay probably had this when he and his men went to Fort Meigs during the War of 1812. It's a really amazing piece. There is a mark here at the very bottom. I'll try to give a close-up there. And I believe it says Schimmelbach. So I'm not quite sure where Green got this sword. And this sword looks really similar if you ever go to museums that have War of 1812 items. It looks really similar to other sabers that were used by American officers during the War of 1812. And the other items that I have here are a set of two pistols, flintlock pistols, and they're actually made out of brass, which is really interesting. These are called box lock pistols. You can see that the lock is right in line with the actual barrel. So not a whole lot is known about these pistols. They do have a proof mark, and it is a Belgian proof mark. If y'all watched one of my earlier videos about Cassius Clay's dueling pistols, they were also made in Belgium. It's got a proof mark that says ELG, and it has a star. So a lot of Belgian-made guns have that proof mark. Not quite sure how Green Clay would have been able to get a set of Belgian-made pistols all the way back in 1812. But Green Clay, of course, was pretty wealthy, so he may have been able to order them. Who knows? At Fort Meigs, there was sort of a list of items that was made, items owned by soldiers and officers. And in that list, it does show that Green Clay had possession of a saber and a set of two pistols. So these probably were all with him at Fort Meigs during the War of 1812. So really amazing pieces of weaponry there, and really amazing craftsmanship as well. So to kind of end it, Green Clay, he takes command of Fort Meigs. The officer in charge of the fort before Green Clay gets there was a General William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, of course, would go on to be President of the United States. But at that time, he was governor of the Indiana Territory, and he was also a U.S. Military general. So Green Clay gets to Fort Meigs and he takes command. William Henry Harrison leaves the fort and gives it basically to Green Clay. So that siege that was going on that Green Clay gets through when he first gets to Fort Meigs does not stop. In fact, there is a second siege that happens while Green Clay is in command of the fort. And it's a really amazing sort of event that happens. And it really shows you the kind of leader that the Shawnee war chief Tecumseh was. He was known for being a brilliant tactician. So basically, the firing the cannons into the fort's not working, and there's so many people and so many supplies in Fort Meigs that they're not really able to cut off the fort from supplies. So basically, the next thing that Tecumseh thinks of is to actually stage a mock battle outside of the fort, just beyond sort of eyesight of the people inside. Tecumseh's plan is that he's going to stage a mock battle, have people firing muskets and cannons and shouting, and make the Americans inside the fort think that there is a force of reinforcements coming to the fort, American reinforcements that are now being attacked by Tecumseh and his men. So it happens, they stage this mock battle. A lot of the Americans inside the fort get really worried and they want to leave. But Green Clay commands his men to stay inside the fort. He says that he hasn't gotten any word that reinforcements are coming and he thinks that there is something up. So finally a rainstorm or a thunderstorm happens and makes the battle end. And after this mock battle is basically the idea is scrapped. A couple of scouts from Fort Meigs leave the fort just to investigate, and they find, in fact, it was a completely staged battle meant to drive the Americans out of the fort, but it doesn't end up working. So after that, the British and the Shawnee pretty much leave Fort Meigs alone. Fort Meigs was meant to basically guard the Maumee River, which goes into the Great Lakes. And it is also pretty close to Canada. So Fort Meigs later on, sort of later in the war, is used basically as a supply depot for an invasion of Canada, but that doesn't go very well either. And by 1814, the War of 1812 is over. So I want to thank y'all for watching this video. I hope you were I hope you found these pieces of these weapons really interesting. And they are at Whitehall. They are on display. So if you want to come and visit Whitehall, you can learn more about the War of 1812 and Green Clay and these really amazing historical artifacts. So I thank you all for watching, and I hope you can come visit the Whitehall State Historic Site.